What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back. This is America Trends. I'm Larry Rifkin along with John Krofsick. And John, here's a provocative question for you.
Yeah.
What will happen when there is no one behind the wheel?
Wow, that's the spooky. I love driving. I find it, not so much being in traffic and stuff, but getting out on the open road and driving is, I don't know, I just find it relaxing.
So they're going to have to pry this wheel out of my cold, dead hands. There's a new one for the National Driving Association, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know. I just can't envision that, And I think I'd be pretty scared letting a computer drive. I wonder if it gets a fatal error while it's driving.
But the Beatles saw it coming. Baby, you can drive my car. Well, look, even when I see an older person sunk behind the wheel, barely able to see out the front window, that scares me.
Yes. Well, no, you're right. There is a point when people should not be driving. Right?
Well, no, I'm saying, imagine when I look over and I see no one there, not even that little person with their forehead. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to react to that. But listen, this podcast, we are going to look into the future when the autonomous vehicle rules the road, John.
Wow.
Think about it.
Oof.
And I got to tell you, I am so glad that this technology wasn't around when you and I were teenagers, because imagine Brian Wilson would have had nothing other than surfboards to write about. Think about it.
You're right. But, some of the technology is good, actually, they find. I think the driver assist thing is good. The automatic braking so you don't rear end somebody is good. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that we're putting in cars now that make them so much safer. But
oh, John, you're absolutely right.
Except for taking the driver away.
But, I mean, they are talking about these autonomous vehicles, and they're saying that this should help erase a lot of the accidents that we now see. And in the United States, John, think about this, 40,000 lives are lost each year to automobile accidents. That's a lot.
That's
and around the world, it's like 1.3 million. So, I mean, we're talking about perhaps saving a lot of lives. Now, you may be listening to this, and I know there are a lot of skeptics about autonomous vehicles. Our guest coming up, Gridlock Sam, is not one of them. He's a great guy, Samuel Schwartz, who's written the book No One at the Wheel. And we're going to be talking to him about this because while he's an advocate of autonomous vehicles, thinking that they're really going to come into vogue in about 2030 and you're going to see a prevalence of them. And if you believe Elon Musk, he said, hey, look, if you don't buy an electric vehicle and one that has a lot of autonomous features, then you might as well just buy a horse.
Well, I think that's a whole different thing. I think we got to move toward electric vehicles or some alternative vehicles to get off of our gas craze. But I don't know. Still, driverless cars still scares me.
Well, I think we're going to have to ease into it. And as you say, you like a lot of the semi-autonomous features.
Right.
But let's be honest, John. I mean, driving is an art form. And some people are better at it than others.
That's true.
Some are more attentive to detail. My wife hates it when I don't put my turn signals on. And I'll say, but I look behind me. There's no one within, the sound of my voice or the sound of my eyes or whatever. Some people are a lot more aware of their surroundings. But no one, let's be honest about it, John, nobody has eyes in the back of their head or the side of their head. And that's what all these sensors, and we talked about it with the 5G technology, that we are going to have a car surrounded by intelligence.
Absolutely. And that's going to save a lot of lives right there. I mean, just as these newer cars get on the road with these features, I mean, it's going to be so much safer for people on the road.
Absolutely. And it's going to allow us to do what now has become the new national pastime. People sit in their cars, hunched over these little screens, doing God knows what for hours. I mean, you're not going to have to look up. You can just be playing with your phone. Isn't that what we all live to do these days? You know, it was absolutely unbelievable, really. And my wife, by the way, who is a physical therapist, reminds me that so many of us, by the way, if you're going to just be looking at your phone, try to look up at it or make it at least equal to your eye level, not down.
You don't want to have a hunchback?
Well, the hunchback? Well, actually, your new cars are going to be like pods. They're not going to be little hatchback hunchbacks. So that's another thing that's going to be changing with the automobile. But I got to tell you, Gridlock Sam, and we love him. He was New York City's traffic commissioner. And I got to tell you, the other day, we were on Ludlow Street on the Lower East Side in New York. And, John, some of these streets in New York are amazing to drive on because they're one way. And you got people parked on both sides. And I was trying to get in so we could load up from a hotel. Yeah. And I had to go in on the left side. And I'm terrible at parallel parking on the left side. So I just kind of ease in and I'm sticking out. And you got cars. I can't wait till somebody can park that car for me. Please. That's the one thing that I want.
Well, they do have that now. Ford has that feature.
You know, a lot of them do, but it's a little extra. Yeah. But I'll buy that. At some point, I'll buy that. So one big caveat, by the way, to some of what we're talking about today, because I know that there are people who have a lot of different concerns. There was a professor at an aeronautical training center, and I'm talking about the Boeing 737 MAX and the recent failures.
That was a fine airplane.
What's that?
That was a fine airplane.
It just had a couple of software glitches. But what they're finding is that some of the pilots are losing their basic flying skills because of over-reliance on the automation.
Absolutely.
That's a concern.
That's a big concern.
But then again, if we never really have to take the wheel back, I don't know. Is it a concern?
Well, I don't know if the plane goes wacko though, like these planes did in nosedive, and you don't know what to do. I mean, that's a big concern, I think.
Well, in a local paper, John, and this was just today, I read, quote, "For all its flaws, the human brain cannot be controlled by a malevolent outside force as a computerized system can be." Well, there are forces. I mean, there are some passengers who can get very annoying about your driving, but hackers can be worse. So I understand the concern that a lot of people have, but they're coming, folks, and you got to understand that. These companies are not investing these billions of dollars in autonomous vehicle technology if not to use it. So let's talk about it right now with Samuel Schwartz here on America Trends. The book is called No One at the Wheel, Driverless Cars and the Road of the Future. And Samuel Schwartz, you are known as Gridlock Sam. You know so much about transportation, having headed the transportation department in New York City. Tell us, you say in this book that autonomous vehicles, and you call them AVs, will be the most disruptive technology to hit our society and society worldwide since the advent of the motor car. Why is that?
This will be a game changer because we are going to see a very powerful industry. We've seen the powerful industries that were formed over the past 30 years from industries that move money around to moving information around. Now the big money is on moving people and goods around. With the big money comes a lot of influence. We saw that 100 years ago. If we turn back the clock to 100 years ago, we were cities that relied on walking, on horse carriages, on bicycles, and very quickly the automobile came on the scene. This caused a lot of disruption, and many cities started to fight back against it, but they lost because of the power of the automobile industry. Well, now this new automobile industry is going to be very powerful. They will influence how cities grow, how roads are built, whether transit systems survive or not, whether people continue walking, where people live. So many things are going to change, not to mention all the jobs that will become something different. Hopefully not too many jobs in the long run lost, but in the short run, lots of jobs will be lost.
Sam, I hear so many people when I mention this topic and said that I was going to be talking to you, and they say, oh, we're never going to have a driverless car. Come on. And I say, well, look, I just look at the money that's being invested by the tech companies and car companies, and they can't all be wrong. So tell me, this is inevitable, correct?
Driverless cars are coming. Now, when they're coming, there are people who will hype and say they're here already. They'll say they're going to be here in 2020. A truly autonomous vehicle that can go anywhere that a driver can go does not exist yet. And it may not exist for another decade. But certainly sometime by the 2040s, let's say, or maybe earlier, you'll be able to drive these cars in Midtown Manhattan and on rural roads that have no signs and no identification. You'll be able to drive them in the snow, in the rain, in darkness. You'll be able to drive them and see, discern between children and dogs. But we're more than a decade away from that. What is here around the corner is vehicles that could be on autopilot. You could get on a highway in Boston and give a destination in California, and that vehicle can remain on that freeway and for the most part do its job without human interference. We're not quite there yet, but we will be there, in which you don't even need a human to do it. So on freeways, the day is coming. It's in the 2020s, and in cities, it's going to be at least the 2030s, 2040s before we can have truly autonomous vehicles, meaning no driver, no steering wheel, no brake, no gas pedal. You just sit back, and it's akin to the elevator of today. 120 years ago, people said, I'm never getting into these automatic elevators, these newfangled elevators. I want a human being to drive me up and down in case we get stuck. Well, now hardly anybody is hesitant to get into an autonomous elevator.
So you care, I know, deeply about walkability. You care about a whole range of quality of life issues, but you're most concerned, I think, about safety. And I would assume that is the problem that this technology is meant to solve. In your book, you talk about the deaths related to cars. Why, in fact, will these driverless cars, because a lot of people can't believe this yet, Sam, and all the sensors they have, why will they be a whole lot better at driving than we are?
Well, it's a combination of things. It's two things. One is safe cars can already be built, much safer cars. If we go back to Ralph Nader when he wrote Unsafe at Any Speed more than 50 years ago, we have cut traffic fatalities, the rate of traffic fatalities, by more than 80%. We could do it again, another 50 to 80% cutback just by insisting that all vehicles have front-end detection devices, automatic braking, lane control devices, blind spot monitoring, and others. You don't need an autonomous car for that. But with an autonomous car, you take out the drunk driver. You take out the teenager that wants to go 120 miles an hour. You take out the inattentive, sleepy driver. And that's why it can be even safer with autonomous vehicles. At the moment, we're not there. In fact, the vehicles, when they're in self-driving mode, at the moment they're crashing more frequently than conventional drivers. That'll be solved over time.
What about the period when we do have drivers and driverless together? That's got to be a transitionary period of 15, 20, 30 years. And you say that ultimately human driving may be banned on some or all roads. People just can't even imagine that possibility.
Yeah, well, we're heading for a very chaotic period, and it's very hard to predict exactly how it'll manifest itself. But I'll give you an example of a crash that happened about a month ago that's emblematic of the kinds of crashes that we're seeing and going to see. It was involved two cars, an autonomous vehicle in autonomous mode. Remember, there are no truly autonomous vehicles. In autonomous mode, going from one freeway in California to another freeway. Now, a typical driver We'll drive onto a freeway, look for a gap, and even if the gap isn't big enough, ultimately push his or her way into the gap between those cars. Well, an autonomous vehicle, in this case, wasn't able to find that gap and came to a complete stop, 1 mile an hour. The driver behind it is used to drivers in front. Let's say this autonomous vehicle is 1,000 feet in front.
Mm-hmm.
By the time somebody is 1,000 feet in front of you and you're looking to accelerate onto a highway, you're not expecting the car in front of you to have stopped, because what do you do in an acceleration lane? You accelerate. But here the autonomous vehicle decelerated. So we're going to have a period. It could be 20 years, 30 years of mixed vehicles of all different kinds of levels of autonomy or no autonomy out there. And it's akin to the period 1900 to 1930, which we had horse carriages, streetcars, pedestrians, all sharing the street with these newfangled automobiles. And it was the deadliest period on America's roads. A wonderful book has been written about it. It's sad, the statistics in it. But Fighting Traffic by Peter Norton describes a period of chaos. We're possibly heading for another period of chaos.
You tell us that the digital transformation of the auto industry is going to deliver $3.1 trillion in societal benefits to the world. Fewer crashes, gas we may not have, or electric cars, less use of the ER, I was told by another guest at one point. I mean, what are the implications of all of this, both financial and societally?
Yeah, it's hard to calculate all the financial benefits when, as I began doing the research, you find some things that you've never thought about. For one, the alcohol industry, it may be time to invest in that, because with autonomous vehicles, you don't have to worry about drunk driving. On the other hand, probably not a good time to invest in parking garages, because with autonomous vehicles, especially if they're fleet-owned, like an Uber-type fleet of vehicles, those vehicles will almost never be parked. The small gas station may no longer be needed, especially in the fleet model, because those vehicles will be driving during the entire day, and probably many of them will be electric vehicles. And at night, they will get recharged, they'll get serviced, and it'll be done in a central facility. Parking tickets pay a good chunk of budgets of many cities. All of a sudden, there'll be gaps of tens of millions to hundreds of millions, and in cities like New York, to over $1 billion in fines that are no longer collected. So there's almost no area that's untouched by the autonomous vehicle, not to mention all the different jobs. We have millions of people that rely on driving as a profession. In 20 states, truck driving is one of the top 3 jobs that there is in that state, and many of them are going to lose their jobs. All the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers that have been enticed in the past few years to become drivers, their days are numbered. So it's no surprise that the model that's being used by these full-hire vehicle companies like Uber and Lyft is capture a lot of customers, and then you could even lower the price further by getting rid of the driver.
Thinking of that, I mean, you also mentioned that, say I have an AV car and I've got to go into a meeting in downtown Manhattan, I might just send the vehicle around just to keep driving around while I'm in the meeting and have it programmed to come back to me, say, in an hour or two. So are we imagining more congestion as a result? All these cars just moving around because, A, we don't want to park them, or B, it's just easier just to send them around the block time and again.
If we do it right, we can see a reduction in congestion. Let me describe the right. In my book, the working title was Driverless Cars, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There are some good things. If we focus on transit vehicles, microtransit, small transit vehicles, in New York, Chicago, LA, they have a company called VIA, which are 7-passenger vehicles that are very effective at picking people up. It's kind of like Uber on steroids. And they develop these algorithms. If we had autonomous transit vehicles of 7 to 15 people, we can improve public transportation. Fewer people will be driving. if we can have those vehicles that could be personally pick up people in suburbs and either at their homes or very convenient locations because of the incredible efficiency that could be garnered through automation, and bring them to train trunk lines or bus trunk lines, we could have less traffic. We could have trucks that could be larger, they'll be safer, longer. They could not have to stop at various locations. They could go across the country in 2 days with no driver, and we could have much greater efficiency. But if we have individual ownership of cars, if we continue the model that we've seen from the app-based car services in which they're replacing transit riders, not replacing car drivers in great numbers, we're in trouble. Traffic congestion will get worse. Now, the efficiency of roads will get better. We will move more cars, but many of those cars may be empty of people, what I call zombie cars. And so we may increase the capacity to move cars, but not to move people. And I think that we're going to have a real problem on very active city streets around the country, around the world, where we have a mix of pedestrians and bike riders, e-scooters, and all the new devices that we're seeing emerging on streets.
Samuel Schwartz, No One at the Wheel. One of the things that you said in the book, and I was trying to wrap my head around this, is the notion that some of these vehicles, well, they're going to be very different. They may not even look like a car. They can be your personal assistant. I mean, there's just many ramifications of this, but also that they might be so cheap that people might tend, if they are going to own a car, and now, of course, many people don't own a car any longer, and they just use it for utility and not as one of their staples in their suburban life, let's say. But you suggest they might be so cheap that you just discard them and leave them by the roadside. Why is that? Why would it be so cheap?
Well, and that's several decades away before they get so cheap. But when you think about it, an autonomous vehicle is your cell phone on wheels that has a chair on it. That's ultimately what it will be. The technology is pretty efficient, once it's mass-produced. The automobile that would be produced could be as thin as an eggshell because the probability of crashes will go down. So the vehicle is far more lightweight. Well, I don't see them being discarded in the future. What I do see is many shared vehicles and vehicles of all kinds of sizes and vehicles doing things that we can't imagine vehicles doing today. IKEA came out with its version of autonomous vehicles, and in one of them, they show you an app, and on your app, you call for a latte, and your cafe comes to you. So we don't know what the future will be. Volvo has a commercial in which you wake up in your car, you have breakfast in your car, you work in your car, you then have lunch delivered by drone in your car, you then have a romantic dinner in your car, and then you go to sleep in your car.
And you're watching the Jetsons at the same time. Hey, how do we add AV technology and still find value for ride sharing and public transit? I know that you believe deeply in public transit, though you quote Elon Musk saying, why would you want to take public transit? It doesn't come right to your door. It's not convenient, doesn't drop you where you want, and you dispute a lot of his thinking on that.
Yes, it's imagine going into a tall building that could be the World Trade Center in New York City, and everybody gets a private automobile. A private elevator. It won't work. So yes, a private car for each person in a suburban community could work, but if you're going to have thriving metropolises, you're going to need public transportation that is very efficient. And so that is key. The autonomous vehicles, they create this hype where they call it an AV train, where the cars follow each other so closely. They can't come remotely close to the capacity of a good busway or a good subway or light rail line. So if we want to live in low-density areas, sure. If we want to put up with traffic congestion, sure, we could we could be lonely in our cars. In fact, we're getting lonelier and lonelier as the years go on, fewer people per car. But I maintain we need a healthy balance. We need good public transportation systems. 90% of the public transportation systems in the United States are systems for poor people, and they are poor systems. Those systems could be replaced by autonomous microtransit and become good systems. But we can't have everybody riding around in their own automobile and think that we could feed cities of 5 million and 10 million and still have the kind of walkability that we want, that the millennial generation and lots of others are really enjoying. There's been a resurgence in cities. It's been wonderful to watch. My previous book, Street Smart, The Rise of Cities and the Fall of Cars, shows that not just the big cities, but the medium-sized cities, the smaller cities, the cities like Des Moines, Iowa. We're working in Des Moines and Fargo, North Dakota, and Boise, Idaho, because they all recognize that the millennials, particularly the educated millennials, particularly the ones that will add to GDP and provide innovation, they're all competing for those people, and they have to create communities where people can bike, where they can walk, where they can have great accessibility, not necessarily great mobility. People confuse mobility, being able to drive 10 miles at 60 miles an hour to get a quart of milk, or walk a few blocks to get that quart of milk in 10 minutes. One is accessibility, the latter, and the other one is mobility. A lot of people are enjoying the accessibility now of denser areas.
Sam, you do say that the impact may be negative on the lowest income individuals at the outset of all of this. And that seems to always be the case, dislocation for those who are poorest and unable to adapt. But what do you see as the implication for the poorest among us?
If we follow history, the low-income people are the ones to benefit the least and get the benefit the last. Even things that are somewhat noble in terms of public transportation, urban transportation, like bike share, largely went to those communities that were wealthier than the low-income communities. There have been a number of studies that have demonstrated that, and now people are working towards solving that problem. The same thing with Uber and Lyft and Via and others. If you look at where they do the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of their trips are in communities where people can afford their services, not the low-income communities. But if we focus on microtransit, if we focus on where the poor are now relying on transportation and make that into good transportation, you will find not just the poor in it, you'll find middle class and you'll find upper class people that are riding it, and that's what gives the public transportation a voice. And without that voice, it will be starved. There's a chapter in my previous book, Street Smart, in which I talk about, the chapter is entitled Tuxedos on the Subway, that a really good transit system is not a transit system that only provides service to the poor, but it's one that attracts the middle class and the upper class. And that's what we really need. And going forward, we should think about that. And that's why I would say let's focus on that microtransit in areas where low-income people are relying on public transportation.
Sam, in closing, the advent of this AV technology, and there will be some quasi-AV, which is already going into our cars today. As we look at this rollout, are there companies that you are most impressed with and we should watch what they're doing? I mean, we've heard about the Apple Car and Google, and then, of course, the traditional automakers. Who should we keep our eye on as this process unfolds and taking this issue more seriously than I think a lot of people I talk to are taking it?
You know, there are some 300 companies that have already been identified that are working in this sphere. Waymo is probably in the lead at the moment, and Waymo's approach has been, we can't rely on a human being to sit there for days and days on end and then react when something goes wrong. So Waymo is really looking at trying to solve the true autonomous vehicle problem. When they solve it, I don't know, but I would say they're a company to watch, Chevy Cruise. But then there are companies like Ford that say, we have to rethink our model from being a motor company to being a company that provides a service, provides rides, being more of a service company. And Bill Ford, who's, I think, the chairman, the executive chairman, has warned about an AV revolution that could cripple and cause gridlock by the year 2050 if we're not smart about how we do things and if we continue on the current track. So they certainly have impressed me. And there are so many other companies out there, and I still yet to find one that is focusing on equity issues and companies that are really investing a good deal of money in the public transit sphere, although a few have just popped up, so I'm delighted to see that.
Well, I've got to say, we're not able to do justice in the 20 minutes we've had with you, but this book is remarkable. If you care about the history of getting around in America and around the world, this is a great book. And then it talks and envisions what the future is going to be like. I recommend it so highly. Samuel Schwartz, No One at the Wheel, Driverless Cars, and the Road of the Future. I thank you so much for being with us today on America Trends.
You're quite welcome.
Hey, Larry, I got some exciting news.
Well, let's hear it, John.
We are now part of the MHNR network.
Really? Where can you find the MHNR network?
We can find us at mhnrnetwork.com.
Let's go there right now.
All right.